startup founders in Singapore. My name is Carmen, and I'll be your host for today. We are honored to have Mr. Edward Chia today here with us to grace the event. As an SME owner himself, Edward has gone through the ups and downs of running an SME in challenging times. I'm sure he will be happy to share some of his advice, especially during the panel discussion later. To kick things off, let us welcome Mr. Dominic Ang, CEO of ACE, to deliver his opening remarks. Dominic, please.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Mr. Edward Chia, Member of Parliament for Holland Bukit Timah GRC, for gracing today's event. Distinguished speakers, ACE members, guests, and media. Good morning. Very warm welcome to the ACE Insight series, where we present thought leadership topics concerning the startup ecosystem. Today, we launch the white paper report on the mental health of startup founders. This study was co-produced by ACE and Safe Space. In conjunction with the launch of the report, we have organized today's forum with the theme Rethinking Mental Wellness in Workplaces. We will hear from our panel of experts on their perspective of the state of mental wellness in workplaces, the steps that employers can take to address mental health issues, and encourage adoption amongst startup founders of some of the interventions. In the white paper report on the mental health of startup founders in Singapore, was revealed that whilst 78% of startup founders agree that mental health is important in a high-functioning team, only 12% admitted to having a mental health advocate within their startup. Another disconcerting finding was that although male founders were twice as likely to agree that running a startup had taken a toll on their mental health, they were equally twice as likely not to confide in anyone. Yet another finding in the report is that the 4 common challenges startup founders face are uncertainty, managing relationships, working alone, and slow progress. Accompanying these are the top stress factors being challenging business environment, company cash flow issues, and long working hours. I encourage you to read the whole report, which can be found at Safe Space's website, and we can also share the link in the chat section later. We thank those who have participated in this survey, which has allowed us to gain deeper insights and have a better understanding of the challenges startup founders in Singapore are facing. We certainly hope that more can be done to raise awareness on mental health support available to startup founders and their employees. We hope that startup founders, investors, and all ecosystem partners alike will find the advice from our speakers useful and inspire others to do the same. This juncture, I would like to express my appreciation to our mental health awareness ecosystem partner, Safe Space, for working closely with us to put this together over the past 6 months or so. Through collaborative partnerships in the ecosystem to increase awareness and address the mental wellness needs of startup founders and employees, I'm confident that we can all emerge stronger. Thank you for your presence and hope to see all of you at the next ACE event. Carmen?
Thanks, Dominic. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Edward Chia to deliver his guest of honor speech. Edward, please.
Hi, thank you so much, Carmen. Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and friends. A very good morning to all of you. It is a great pleasure for me to be here at the launch of the white paper on mental health of startup founders, produced by the Action Committee for Entrepreneurship and Safe Space. We spent the last year fighting the battle against COVID-19, and the detrimental economic consequences needs no further elaboration. It is also undeniable that the prolonged and isolating disposition of COVID-19 aggravated latent stresses while creating new ones. With the established fact that work environments, organizations, and work-related behaviors contribute to the mental health and psychological well-being of employees, it can thus be seen that COVID-19 has had considerable psychological impacts on the work masses. An increased number of users now face stresses of working from home, home-based learning, and financial uncertainty, alongside the struggles of surpassing societal stigma to seek help. Based on the findings in this white paper, almost 60% of the respondents agree that running a startup has taken a toll on their health, alongside the day-to-day demands of life. Although roughly 80% of these startup founders gave high scores on the importance of mental health to them as individuals, these startups do not have an appointed mental health advocate, and 59% of them currently do not provide any mental health resources to their staff. The theme for the panel discussion, Rethinking Mental Wellness in Workplaces, resonates with me. Although there are grassroots organizations with mental health agenda in Singapore, there is still an absence of a central coordinating framework which will push for the progress required, of which discussions relating to citizens' mental health occur proactively. Top executives of startups can also engage and support employees with potential mental health challenges. This also means taking care of their own mental health as well, so that they can be good role models for healthy behaviors. One such example is 99.co, who recently provided 1 year of premium access to an app by MindFi, a mental wellness startup. With the belief that mindfulness can be practiced anytime, this app provides stress management practices as short as 1 minute without disrupting employees' work demands. Users can also explore masterclasses on mental health and well-being, and this app provides a safe space to talk about their mental health as well as the necessary resources to take charge of it. Better mental health translates into improvements in physical health, productivity, relationships, as well as social interactions. The Tripartite Advisory on Mental Well-being at Workplaces was recently developed to guide employers in facilitating mental wellness checks in the workplace. Some of these initiatives include access to anonymized external counseling services, as well as training for supervisors to recognize the early stages of mental health symptoms. The Ministry of Manpower is also piloting iWork Health, a web-based psychological assessment tool which aids employers and their employees to pinpoint workplace stresses while recommending ways to improve mental well-being. COVID-19 is not the first and will not be the last global pandemic. I urge all of us to spread the word and to tell your friends, family, and colleagues to take greater interest in mental health. Together, we will be able to strive towards the vision of a mental health resilient nation. On this note, I wish all of us a fruitful and rewarding session this morning, and I look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edward, for the very inspiring speech. To our audience, there will be a general Q&A segment at the end of the panel. If you have any questions for the panelists, you may submit your questions in the link in the chat box or upvote the questions there as well. In our next segment, I would like to introduce Lynette, who is also the Chief Operation Officer at Safe Space, to share with us the background behind this study that we conducted, as well as some of the insights derived from the survey and interviews. Lynette, please.
Right, thanks, Carmen. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to, thanks for giving us the opportunity this morning to go through this white paper, highlight some key findings, and hopefully tease you all into downloading it to find out more details. So I'll start off the session with how the study actually came about. So sometime in September, October last year, we at Safe Space were having a conversation with ACE about, in light of the pandemic, we know that mental health is a growing concern across the board. How can we help ACE's startup community in specific ways to safeguard their mental health? So we figured that the first step for this was actually to put our ear to the ground, find out what exactly is unique to the challenges that startup founders in Singapore are facing, and then be able to enable them and their teams to understand what resources are available and how to access them. Finally, as part of the broader ecosystem and the startup community, we also want to encourage investors and as well as accelerators and incubators to think about how they can also help to prioritize startup founder mental health as a safeguard for their own investments. So the approach for this, we took about 4 months to do this at the start of this year, where we surveyed over 160 founders from entrepreneurial networks, incubators, accelerators across Singapore, and then did a deeper dive interview with more than 30 of them to get some in-depth qualitative data. Finally, we took the findings and brought it and had a review of that with 4 of our clinical therapists at Safe Space to provide some recommendations about how startup founders and their teams could address the issues that arose from the study. So today I'll be covering, bringing you through 3 chapters of the highlights of 3 chapters of the paper. So firstly would be the sources of stress among startup founders. Secondly would be what differences there are we are seeing between male and female founders. And the last one would be a comparison between solo founders and co-founders. So for all the startup founders out there, or everybody who's part of the startup ecosystem, does this story or recount sound familiar to you? Since I started running a startup, it has been a roller coaster ride mentally. The uncertainty often makes me feel uptight, and I tend to snap at people. This makes maintaining close personal relationships difficult and frustrating, especially when it feels like my friends and family don't seem to understand what I'm going through. I find it hard to wind down in the evenings, and I have trouble sleeping. So in a nutshell, this is what we're seeing as a typical startup founder as part of our response, as the response that came in. So overall, 59% of startup founder respondents agreed or strongly agreed that running a startup had taken a toll on their mental health. Instability and uncertainty are key features of startup life. While founders recognize that both the impact on their mental health arose from running a startup and the need to prioritize it, they also struggled to find time to find appropriate strategies to cope with it. 70% of respondents reported that maintaining close personal relationships was difficult and frustrating for them, primarily because they found it hard, even if they did want to speak to somebody, their close friends and family about it, unless they were startup founders themselves or were plugged into the system, they did not find them able to empathize. And whenever they shared some of the stories that we heard from the founders was that when they tried to share some of the challenges or what was going through their heads with regard to running the business, some people would find it crazy. The top stressors overall that startup founders reported were the challenging business environment, especially as a result of COVID, along with cash flow issues, team dynamics, and long working hours. There's also an element of guilt that a lot of them expressed as well, that choosing to take the risk to run their startup was actually perhaps jeopardizing their family finances unnecessarily, as well as creating uncertainty around the ability to pay their own bills and student loans. So I believe this statistic was alluded to in both the keynotes earlier, where 78% of the respondents rated the importance of their team's mental health as high, and yet 88% of them did not have an appointed mental health advocate. So while startups place a high importance on their mental health, they tend to be taking a more reactive approach rather than a proactive approach to manage and resolve issues. Only when an employee perhaps comes up to them and says, "Hey, I'm really struggling and I'm anxious all the time, working with the team," only then they step in, and then they realize that there's an issue and then step in to try to resolve it, instead of doing earlier check-ins or periodic check-ins to assess the mental health state of their employees. So looking at gender differences now, how does the mental health of male and female startup founders differ? So female founders were more likely to report cash flow issues as well as physical health as stressors, while male founders were more likely to cite interpersonal relationship issues with their co-founders as well as team dynamics. So females reported through the interviews as well, the challenge of having to bear more of the burden at home, in the household or with their family, on top of their usual startup founder responsibilities. So in order to deal with these two competing sources of stress, they end up compromising their own self-care, sleeping late, and prioritizing these other areas above themselves. So hence, they compromise their own health by burning the candle on both sides. Male founders, on the other hand, cited interpersonal relationship issues, either because they were more likely to lash out verbally and aggressively when stressed, as they found it hard to, or that they felt hard to communicate their struggles to others. Which leads very nicely to the next point, that male founders were almost twice as likely to confide in no one, while female founders were significantly more likely to rely on peer support and family support. So male founders tended to put some kind of pressure on themselves and think that they have to put on a strong front or not show weakness, and that admitting that they are struggling is taboo socially. So they basically feel that they have to bear it all alone and take all the struggles by themselves. Talking is one of the easiest therapeutic solutions to relieving stress and emotionally processing problems. So female founders were able to gain emotional support by leaning on their support networks, be it peers or family. Finally, let's look at the impact that the number of co-founders had on mental health. So majority of the startups that were negatively impacted by COVID were actually those that were founded by solo founders, whereas those with co-founders tended to report that they were positively impacted. So this seems to suggest that having the support of a co-founder, especially during absolutely crazy times like an ever-changing landscape with the pandemic, is incredibly beneficial. As you can see from one of the quotes in the founder stories below, somebody said, "If I were a solo founder, I would go crazy of having to deal with multiple stresses and by themselves." Solo founders had fewer issues with stresses like team dynamics and relationships with co-founders, since they don't have any. They were stressed from issues like long working hours and relationships with family. So while having a co-founder could mean another source of stress, because it is another relationship, another type of relationship to manage. I'm sure most of you here have heard tons of nightmare or horror co-founder stories of things going really, really sour. But when you do find a positive co-founder relationship, it can be extremely beneficial. Solo founders often tend to work longer hours because nobody keeps them in check to say, "Hey, take a break, look after yourself." And open communication between co-founders, even when problems arise, and they inevitably will, being committed to open communication helps to clear the air and helps the company move forward as well. Solo founders will also tend to, not having that sounding board of a co-founder also tends to make solo founders let their problems brew and worsen because they either cannot find anybody to share it with, or they don't feel comfortable sharing it with the other people in their lives. Co-founders were more likely to rely on exercise and drinking, whereas solo founders were more likely to rely on smoking and religion. So this was an interesting one that came up. I figured perhaps drinking was more sociable, and that, but exercise across the board was reported as the main coping mechanism that that founders did use, and thankfully, yes, that is a healthy one that we encourage. What we do at Safe Space is that we have start the week right on Monday mornings, where we try to make it for an exercise class or something, to just keep each other in check that, yes, prioritizing your mental health, prioritizing physical health is a component of mental health. Yeah, and having that co-founder to make sure to keep you accountable and check in on you is another beneficial aspect of having co-founders. Looking at some trends that came up in the interviews, yeah, this was alluded to before. The main issues the main difficulties expressed throughout the interviews could fall into 4 buckets. Most prominently, uncertainty as a function of the environment, especially with the pandemic that we're operating in. The innate uncertainty of trying to build a startup from scratch, and the uncertainty of job stability that you would otherwise have, perhaps in the corporate world. The other themes of the difficulties experienced during the startup journey would be managing relationships, working alone, and frustration at slow progress. One of the things that we ask at Safe Space when matching clients with therapists is, what physical symptoms are you experiencing? Similarly to this, 23% of founders reported sleep issues like insomnia, perhaps even being unable to wake up in time, sleeping too much as well. All this bucket of sleep problems as a physical manifestation of the stresses that they're facing. This also is a vicious cycle where stress leads to them being able to have less sleep, and then less sleep leading them to become less productive, and then kind of cycling back. So being less productive leads to more stress, leads to less sleep, and just goes on. So sleep is definitely the top physical concern that startup founders are reporting. So I'd like to take a pause here and just get a bit of interaction. I'd like to ask you, why is looking after startup founder mental health important? From your different perspectives, maybe if you're a founder, why is looking after your own mental health important? If you're an investor, why is making sure that your startup founder's mental health is important and prioritizing it? So if you could just scan the QR code on the top left corner, or join slido.com at the bottom, you'll be able to input your comments anonymously. I'll give you a couple of minutes to fill this up. Yeah, to safeguard your investment, especially for companies where, with solo founders, that pretty much that's your key man, right? That's your key person that's make or break for the company. So yeah, definitely. I like this one. I don't want to go crazy. Yes, that's good. Sustenance, great. Yeah, to boost productivity, that's great as well. Yeah, similar to taking a parallel with physical health. If you're physically healthier, you're able to do more things. More things. Physically. Same with mental health. Oh my gosh, part of BCP. Wow, that is great. Part of BCP, part of your business continuity plan, definitely. Yeah, happy founder, happy team. No health equals to no startup. Yeah, if you stop being able to function, the company basically stops being able to function. They're in a way, the brains and brawn behind the business. So if they go down, the long-term sustainability of the company is at risk. Yeah, and again, the parallel between good mental health as well as physical health. Yeah, so definitely all very valid, and I think we'll be able to go into this in a bit more detail in the panel later. So I'll move on just to the next, to the final question and the final portion of this presentation, which is similar, another poll. What can you do in your individual capacities to improve startup founder mental health? So we recognize the importance of prioritizing startup founder mental health. What are actions that we can take? We can all take. Find someone to talk to. Yeah. Talking. Yeah, talking is one of the easiest therapeutic solutions that we have. Have frequent open chats. I think the willingness, a good first step from these two comments is being open to having the chat. And then looking for somebody whom you can have that with. Yeah, talking to someone you trust, pray, walks. Oh, I love walking. Walking helps me. Walking is what I use for my own mental health, like take long walks, quiet, get in touch with advocates. Yeah, people who support you. Sometimes even if other people in your network are not able to understand, at least they can provide a listening ear, and the benefit of that should not be dismissed. No time to walk, time to stretch while still struggling a bit. I love that. Yeah, okay, whatever works. Stretch out those aching muscles from sitting down at the desk all the time. Make sure I have alone time to recalibrate. Yep, especially for introverts, this is very important. Find cheap therapy. Okay, yeah, and be part of founders WhatsApp group who can support each other. Yep, network. Schedule self-care time. Absolutely. So basically find people that you can speak to, share with those in the community as well. Retreats, find time for yourself, and really plug out. I know this is extremely difficult to do. Really plug out where you say, all right, man. Download safe space. All right. Love this one. Okay. I think we're a bit tight on time, so I will just stop right here. Thank you for your attention this morning. You can download the white paper from this link here. It's also in the chat. And I'll pass the time back to you, Carmen.
Thank you, Lynette. That was certainly very insightful. I love the Slido interactions. Yes. So the full white paper report is available online, and the link to download is also in the chat. There are tips in the white paper, we have tips from therapists on how to manage some of the common sources of stress. And of course, yes, you can also download the Safe Space app, so you can receive mental wellness support services as well. As a teaser, those who are ACE members, you actually get a discount off the services of Safe Space platform. So you can reach out to us for more details. As shared, the theme for today is on rethinking mental wellness in workplaces. And so we will move on to the next segment, our panel discussion segment, where we will really deep dive into what this, our thoughts and our perspectives on this. We will seek to hear from our distinguished and diverse panel as well on their perspectives and even their experience on what startups founders go through, along with some of the measures to manage the stresses faced and some of the sources and areas of support in the ecosystem as well. So today, on the panel, we have Edward, whom we have already introduced earlier. I'd like to also introduce Antoinette from Safe Space, the co-founder and CEO of Safe Space. We also have Leanne, who is the Executive Director from the Singapore Association for Mental Health. And last but not least, we have Jeff, who is the co-founder of Big Tiny. So before I begin, may I invite each of our panelists to do a self-introduction to our audience, perhaps starting with Edward.
Thank you, Carmen. Really glad to be part of this panelist. I think in addition to my role as a member of parliament, I'm actually an entrepreneur, started a company, and actually recently I sold off my stakes in the company I set up 16 years ago, and back to being a startup founder. So I'm actually now starting a new company in the sustainability space. This topic about mental wellness of startup founders is really personal to me because you know, that old saying, it gets really lonely at the top is really true. Many bosses, many owners really have no one to talk to at times. And in front of investors, in front of our team, we need to put up a brave face, because we have to how we relate to them, whether it inspires confidence or no confidence. And in the past 1.5 years, I've also had many conversations with other SME bosses, and many SME businesses owners are going through very, very challenging times. Many of them have taken up loans, they may have mortgaged their homes, and some of them are really being chased by bankers on the daily basis, but yet they feel strongly that they need to ensure the survival of their companies, not for themselves, but for their employees, because many of them have gone through the thick and thin for the companies. So I think this topic is very important. I think we all need to do our part to help founders, but I think the question earlier by Lynette about why do we need to help founders is also because founders are leaders of the company. And if we help the leader, we then help the rest of the team. And I'm really glad that ACE and SafeSpace have published this white paper to create a bit more awareness. I hope through the panel discussions, we can talk about action plans. What can we do next? And what can we push, not just from a policy point of view, but also what can we do as entrepreneurs, and what can we do as a community as well. So thank you so much.
Okay, I'll go next. Hi everyone, my name is Antoinette. I'm the founder and CEO of SafeSpace. You know, SafeSpace started from a personal need. I personally went through burnout myself, which maybe some of you in the audience might have gone through that as well. And that's how the whole idea of SafeSpace came about. Being in Asia, talking about mental health is not as easy. Finding a therapist is also not as easy and can be embarrassing for some of us. So that's the whole point of why SafeSpace started. For me personally, I wanted to shed more light on startup founder mental health, because after speaking with other founders as well, it is definitely something that everyone faces, but everyone's too scared to actually share or be vulnerable in front of each other, because you have to have this certain persona that you've got it together. If not, it'll make you look weak in front of your other investors or your team. So the whole point of this white paper as well was to just have an open forum for people to feel like they are not alone in this. There are many other startup founders who are going through this. And I hope after today's session, you will know that there are affordable resources available for you guys to firstly educate yourself and to find an affordable EAP program that you can roll out to your team, and just let you guys know that you're not alone. So yeah, that's me.
Hi, maybe I go next. I'm Lian from Singapore Association for Mental Health. SMH is a charity, is a non-profit organization. Although we are founded like more than 50 years ago, when I joined SMH 2 years ago, I feel like I'm starting all over, because there's a lot of things that we need to develop and change. Then COVID came, and like what Edward say, it's actually not easy to be helming, and founders are really the leaders and helming the place and have to put things together. So we have our fair share of mental health issues among ourselves, although we are supposed to be helpers to promote wellness and support people with mental health needs and all. So I'm thankful that I have the opportunity to be at this panel, and we possibly can share a little bit more about how founders as individuals actually can also receive support from the community. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess I'll go next. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff. Happy to be here amongst the other established panelists and Mr. Edward Chia, of course. I'm Jeff. I'm the co-founder of Big Tiny. So Big Tiny is a company that is sort of set up as well to help city dwellers like us sort of relax amongst the nature and scenery, but of course having still the comforts of a tiny house itself. So of course, needless to say, when the pandemic struck back last year, we were also quite taken aback. We were uncertain about how this whole situation would pan out. But of course, I think currently only we are suffering because we cannot go to Australia for our business trips and stay in our wonderful tiny houses. But happy to say that in terms of the business wise, we are still doing currently quite well in Australia, where the local domestic travel scene is quite lively now, except of course during the lockdown. So happy to be here to actually think about, or rather share more about how we could actually place more focus on the mental health of everyone in the company, because I guess this is a topic that is really important, but has been, I would say, put aside, or nobody ever brings it up. Yeah, so that's me. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks to all the panelists for the self-introduction as well. I think it is clear that running a business has certainly taken a toll on the founder's mental health, especially if you're a business owner. And this is also largely correlated with productivity and social networks, which are vital for the prosperity of all startups or all businesses essentially. And so maybe for a start, we would like to discuss on the causes of stresses that startup founders face, as shared by Lynette earlier. So in the white paper, it was stated that solo founders was often stressed from issues like long working hours, relationships with families, so on and so forth. I would like to first ask perhaps Edward and Jeff, what can we do to effectively reduce some of these stresses? Have you faced them yourself, and how do you attempt to solve them?
Maybe I go first. Have I faced it almost every day? I think that's the nature of owning a business. You go through multiple stresses, and at least when I was still running Timber, sometimes my mood swings as wildly as the sales data of the day itself. So at some point I realized there was once I would usually check the sales data before I sleep at night. And then I realized that that really impacts my quality of sleep, because if it's a good night, then I sleep better. If it's not a very good night, I don't sleep very well. So I had to, in some ways deal with it and actually change certain patterns. So I decided to not check the sales data before I sleep. I check it the next morning. So at least I can sleep a bit better. So I think the way I guess I dealt with it was more of trying to tweak certain way of working. And even for me right now, the best way I cope with stress is actually physical exercise. I think that's something that Lynette mentioned earlier, that she takes long walks. I feel energized. I feel much better when I go for runs. I do some weightlifting. So I really feel that physical and mental wellness are interlinked. They are not separate. And for most of us, at least for me, I exercise. And I think it's also about being disciplined on when to tune out. So I try my very best not to check my emails on Sundays. I feel that at least one day a week to tune out is actually very helpful to recharge physically, mentally, emotionally as well. And then Monday we are raring to go again. I also maintain some discipline on emails on weekends also, because I realized that if I send an email to my team feels obligated to reply me on weekends. So what I do also has an impact to my colleagues, and I will also like them to have as much rest as possible. So unless it's a very urgent, pressing matter, I try not to, in a way, disturb my colleagues on their rest day and their personal days. Yeah, so I think as a leader, what we do for ourselves is important, but we also have a huge impact on how our colleagues cope with stresses too.
Okay, perhaps my turn to go. For myself, I guess I fall into the majority of what the white paper said, and basically it's a 43% who is more stressed out about the uncertainty, which I guess is something that is really common amongst all startup founders, because when we start the business, we are not sure what the future holds for the company in terms of sales figures, in terms of expansion plans. And I guess more so for Big Tiny, because ultimately our area of operations is in Australia. So it is a new country, it is a new territory, and no amount of market research and feasibility studies would actually beat you actually taking the plunge and doing it yourself and finding out what comes after. So that is one source of stress. And then of course, the pandemic last year also brought up another new kind of stress, which I guess nobody ever expected, especially because I still remember that we were in Sydney holding a tiny house festival where it was attended by 8,000 to 9,000 people over 2 days. And after the successful organization of that, we flew back and almost immediately the next day, this whole COVID situation spun out of control, where we had to voluntarily, I would say, shutter our rental accommodation business for the sake of our land partners' health, and also basically because we needed time to see how we could pivot during this pandemic itself, introduce sanitization measures for our houses so that the guests could still stay at our houses after it reopens with a peace of mind. And of course, other uncertainties that comes up every now and then in terms of, for example, investments from other people and stuff. So I guess personally for me, because I love talking to people, talking would be my way of relieving stress. So talking to co-founders. So I do not belong to the category of solo founder. So I guess that's a lucky thing. I have two other co-founders, and the three of us, we speak really frequently. That would be, I guess, the most effective stress reliever for me. And of course, on top of that, personally, I'm a little bit more old school. So regardless of how late I sleep at night, I tend to keep aside half an hour where I watch the TV. Yeah, Channel 5, Channel 8. I know it's a bit old school, but that's how I relieve my stress personally as well. And also, because I'm also in charge of the sales side of the company, I try to tend to leave one of my weekends aside for my family, because I think for us, we spend a lot of hours at work, and we shouldn't neglect our family, especially when they are probably the ones that are supporting us the most throughout our entire journey. Yeah. And then of course, at work itself, what we try to implement is weekly walks amongst nature, so that all our staff could actually have a enjoyable 1 to 2 hours of walk where we walk at a leisurely pace, not at a competitive pace. And then we have a good breakfast that spurs everyone on before starting the day. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Edward. Thanks for sharing certainly very practical tips on how to cope with some of the stress that leaders or the employees face in the companies. Anto, I was wondering if you would like to add, since you're a startup founder yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I think the common misconception is that if you're running a mental health startup, you don't have the same stress we do. We're still having the same stresses that all other startup founders face. What we decided to do after the result of this survey as well was to implement more mental health strategies within our own company. So, for example, we actually launched something called Wind Down Fridays to really clock off on a Friday by doing like a trivia. And it's become very competitive and quite entertaining. So it's a good way to just ease into the weekend. But we've also implemented more leave within the company, and more leave that is not necessarily that difficult to take. So for example, we've given more leave like caregiver leave, because some of us are in the sandwich generation, and we've implemented mandatory mental health days within Safe Space, because we know although we give annual leave, people might not take it. So it's a mandatory mental health day that they have to go and get some rest. So we're doing more things like that, and just asking the team what else would they like to do when it comes to their own mental health. So if it's a matter of just taking some time off, or improving their own development plan, or things that's not related to work, it can be something on their personal side that is affecting their mental health, like finances. How can we educate them in different areas? So we're incorporating a lot more of this within our own workplace, and also conducting more regular mental health surveys within the company. So do they have enough resources to get the work done? How are they coping in their job? So doing things like this to do like a sanity check within your own organization is really going to be beneficial for the company, and for you to then be able to take actionable steps to improve that for your employees.
Thanks, Anto. I guess this provides a very nice segue actually into our next theme for the panel discussion, which is on resources available in the ecosystem. So actually from the study, I think results showed that 78% of respondents gave a high score on this importance of the team's mental health, and as much as what you shared about what you did for Safe Space. Yet 88% of them did not have an appointed mental health advocate. But to those who had, how they assess their team's mental health is through informal conversations. which actually could be legally quite risky as well, if they offer unqualified advice to employees. And so as such, I guess we saw a gap through this survey that mental health training and leadership support is clearly needed. And a proper adoption of mental wellness support for startups can also be better facilitated. So from the research, we also saw that currently more than half of the founders do not provide mental health resources to their staff. So maybe Leanne, given that the Singapore Association for Mental Health also provides such resources, what are your thoughts on this? Leanne, sorry, you're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's an important consideration for startup. Although generally startup are not having big teams, it is actually even more important to consider having company policy. Even if the company is 3% or 5%, about how to address some mental wellness needs. So what we would suggest, like SMH, we do have a community education and engagement team where we share with corporates about how they can help to raise awareness among the team about good mental wellness, mental health. Yeah, some people may think that I don't have a mental illness, that means I'm mentally well. Actually, it doesn't equate. Some people who may have mental illness may have very good mental health. Yeah, whereas some people who don't have a mental illness actually do need to improve their mental wellness and mental health. So I think first thing, if there's a need, can engage support externally or find out the resources themselves to actually raise the awareness within the team, the company, about good mental health, mental wellness. And if there are concerns that there are maybe colleagues for inclusive employments, we actually encourage that even people with some mental health concerns, they should be able to work and they can perform as well. But then how do we relate with them? So sometimes actually some people don't have a mental health issues before starting work, but as they work, we all started having some mental health needs and all. So how to relate to each other? So for co-employee, we also do talks and training about how we can relate to each other and support each other as a co-employee. And then we also do a kind of a training for HR, for leaders, employers, about inclusive employment and how we can support the team, the staff, in terms of promoting mental wellness, as well as supporting those who already have a mental health conditions or concerns within the team. So there is, other than SMH, there are also other community organization, non-profit or social service organization that do such support. And for SMH, among some of those that specifically look at mental health, SMH has a toll-free number, which I think there is a QR code that the participants can scan right at the end, where anybody can call in during working hours to just talk to someone. It's a toll-free helpline, and if there's a need, they can make appointment to actually talk with our full-time counselor to talk about their problems, and the service is actually free of charge. We would just encourage people to do a small donations. Of course, if there is people are not so comfortable, it is completely free. So there are quite a few support line actually in the community that especially for startup, if there's a cash flow issue and all, and there is some concerns about getting to paid service, they can consider that as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Leanne. Anto, would you also like to add?
Sure. So for Safe Space, we do have a corporate offering that we roll out to SMEs and MNCs. And the common feedback that we get from startup founders is they would love to roll out something for their organization as well. It's just that they don't have the same kind of wellness budgets that an MNC would have, which has made it quite difficult. So for us at Safe Space, we don't have a toll-free hotline, but what we provide instead is video call and face-to-face counseling. And the benefit of going through that is that you can actually work with one individual therapist and they will walk with you on that journey. And to make it affordable for startup founders to actually get access to that as well, we've actually reduced our pricing for corporate EAP programs to make it very affordable for startup founders to actually roll something like this out. As a startup founder myself, I know how important is cash flow. Cash flow is king. So we have actually created a no-frills package, about 5 counseling sessions, for example, that you can easily roll out for yourself, or you can also extend it to your team. If you feel that you want the whole team to actually be part of this mental health initiative, then could you consider doing webinars for your whole team so that collectively as a team, all of you improve your mental health literacy? No one is singled out if you're worried about pinpointing it at somebody, and collectively you can identify the strategies, the signs of distress, and together you both can actually help to look out for a particular individual that is struggling. So we have a startup friendly EAP package that we are happy to share later on. It is below $1,000. And for those who find that that might be still too expensive, we can customize something for you. Absolutely no problem. The whole point of this is that we want to ensure there is continuity of care, that we walk with you from start to finish and not leave you hanging. And that is ultimately our end goal.
Thanks, Endo. Thanks, Ian. Certainly seemed that I think prior to the this survey, actually, I did not realize that there was actually many avenues for startups to actually access such resources in the community, both within the startup ecosystem and the wider community as well. So that was very interesting. I guess we could also move on towards the next theme, which is actually towards an inclusive workplace, which is what we have been trying to think about today, right? How can we rethink mental wellness in workplaces? And in a workplace, it's not just, I guess, supporting founders, right, themselves, or the business owners themselves. It is also important to support your employees. Yeah. So how can we, I guess I want to hear, this is open to all the panelists, how can we encourage, I guess, different stakeholders, or firstly business owners in the ecosystem, to prioritize mental wellness in the workplace, and then also to the rest of the stakeholders in the ecosystem as well? Maybe Edward, would you like to start?
Sure, Carmen. I think for business owners, because business owners ultimately they are looking at the bottom line. I think one of the main stresses is cash flow, profitability. We do need to start drawing some logical link in terms of actual correlations of prioritizing mental wellness to revenue and profitability. I think just now in one of the sliders when Lynette was going through, it was actually a very pragmatic reply. So why do we need to prioritize startup founders? Many said, protect my investments, it's productivity, which is true. So if we have more and more data to actually show that X investments in mental wellness equates Y investment, Y increase in productivity, and Z increase in revenue and profitability, it would actually really help the majority of business owners to take this as a priority, to take this as important, because a lot of the conversations on mental wellness today is still within, I would say, the social space. This is something that's socially important to do. We do need to start building an economic argument. In fact, this is something as an MP that I'm also trying to start researching on, and possibly even speak in Parliament on this, that there is actually an economic imperative to prioritize mental well-being as a nation. And I believe there is. So if there are more data to show that, I think that would be very helpful, because we do need to swing the large majority of business owners to take this as a key priority. So that's the first part in terms of awareness, attention, and prioritization. The second part is actually picking up from what Leanne and Antoinette mentioned earlier, is about capacity building. After a business owner says, yeah, I agree, this is a priority, but what can I do about it? I do not know how to do it. I speak to my HR manager. the HR managers are not trained in this aspect, right? How can I begin helping my fellow co-workers, colleagues, team members in this journey to better mental wellness? So I firmly believe in capacity building, skills building. I think a webinar on general mental wellness literacy is very important to start with a starting base. Importantly is then for HR directors, managers, and CEOs, skill sets, for example, on mental first aid responders. Today, if a co-worker comes and says, I'm having a bad day, I'm really burnt out, I'm really stressed, or in some cases, the extreme, I feel like ending it all, ending my life. Most of us actually do not know how to react. We do not know what to say. We do not know how to respond. And that could be a clear skills mismatch, a clear skills lack. And if we can start building that capacity and upskilling individuals in the company, we then get more confident in talking about these issues and dealing with it. Because at the human nature level, we tend to avoid a topic because we do not know much about it and we are insecure about it. So we tend to avoid it. So by building that confidence through actual skills, technical skills in mental first aid responder, first helps you in terms of awareness of self, and then also awareness of your environment. And then leadership in the company can actually take concrete actions. And then everything becomes more positive, everything becomes actionable. Right? So I feel that we need to work on step one, which is greater emphasis, prioritization, and awareness and attention from business owner by building the economic argument or economic case. And then secondly is to upskill and provide capacity building within company leadership. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's a great segue for me actually. So I've been speaking to over 200, in fact, at this point of about 400 HR directors now, and all of them want to do more for their employees, especially after seeing what's been happening during COVID. The reality is that in Asia, mental health is a new conversation. So they are also trying to figure this out for themselves and to also figure out how they can roll this out, identify a mental health advocate in the office, and to actually send them for certain kinds of training. So I completely agree with what you said, Edward, that capacity building is very much needed. This is why, separately from what we're doing with ACE, we are also working with Ngee Polytechnic to actually create an online course that is completely co-funded by SkillsFuture. So this is one way that we can help to reduce costs, especially on a company level, where this online course is actually called Building Mental Resilience with Growth Mindset. So helping you to identify the signs, how you can cultivate your own resilience. And you mentioned about psychological first aid. This is actually part of the modules within this course. And because of the subsidy, it's very affordable. It is up to 90% government subsidy. So if you're thinking of sending somebody as a mental advocate within your team to actually go for training for something like that, that is a very affordable course that you can send either one individual or you can learn and use your own SkillsFuture credit to go for that.
Thanks, Santa. Jeff, perhaps as a fellow startup founder as well, would you like to elaborate on how we can encourage perhaps more startup founders to actually prioritize mental wellness in startups?
So I would guess that the points made by Edward and Antoinette is very, very valid, and I totally agree with them as well. Just like to add on, for example, that I would say that there are probably a lot of resources available for everybody, I would say. But I would say perhaps some has to be put in terms of increasing the exposure and awareness level of everyone to these resources present, because I guess we as Asians, we tend to, like Edward mentioned, not talk about stuff like that because it is sensitive, it's taboo, it makes you look weak, for example. But however, it is really important. So if we raise the awareness levels of the resources that are available, as well as also increase the capabilities of the skill sets of people within the company, which may be someone that your staff may be more comfortable talking to, as opposed to, for example, seeking professional help, where there's a stigma, for example, that, oh, you are crazy, that's why you're going to a counselor or a psychologist. So that might be a softer baby step towards accepting and embracing this whole mental health strengthening issue. So I would guess from my end, it's just about, I would say, really in general, increasing the exposure and awareness of the mental health resources that we have available. And of course, I would say starting with the leaders of the business, because that is really important, because if they do not see that this is an important aspect, more often than not, the sales, the bottom lines are probably what they are looking at for sure, and place over importance over the mental health of their staff. Yeah, thank you.
I would just like to add that actually there was a study done by NCSS, National Council of Social Service, in 2017 on the attitudes towards persons with mental health conditions in the workplace. And actually, this part about cost, employer perceive cost of having a mental wellness program or policy or support. They think is higher. Actually, in reality, it's not as high as what they perceive the cost to be. And actually, the returns and the benefit is much better. So there was a survey on that. And also in the workplace, I think when we talk about inclusive employment, the fear and concern of disclosing that you may need some support on the mental health or mental wellness side, it is very real because of this stereotype thinking or stigma. And in the same survey, actually, I think it was about 6 in 10 people, persons surveyed, believe that mental health conditions are caused by a lack of self-discipline and willpower. So I think it is really important to raise awareness about everybody need good mental wellness, and if you do have a mental health concern or situation at a certain point of time, it does not mean that you are less capable. So this is a very, very important topic in actually workplace. Yeah.
Actually, I was also curious to hear from Leanne. Just now you mentioned also the type of support that's available in the community. In your experience, how has the take-up of that been like? And if are there more employees that take it up, or is it employers?
Okay, we just managed to organize our data for 2020 for our counseling service and our helpline services. Actually, during the CB period, there was about, I think, 50% increase in terms of calls to our helpline. And for those cases that eventually take up counseling, we actually found that about 72% are people who are aged 40 years and below. So actually, we find that possibly maybe 40 years and below is considered younger group. They are the people who are working and possibly sandwich. So we think it's a good figure in that. It's a good sign that maybe as a Asia country, we don't talk about, and hopefully we are moving away from that. Our people educated, who are educated and are more exposed to information, are beginning to see the need and not afraid to reach out for themselves. So and a lot the main issues that they brought up are really stress, stress, relationship, and of course juggling work, and some have no work or lost their job. Yeah. So these are some of the things we pick up, and I think it is a healthy sign to us that more people are reaching out to helpline and to counseling. And what we actually propose is for people who really feel later they prefer the comfort of getting a earlier appointment and all, they can go for paid service that is affordable, like what Safe Space is doing. But for those who because this, for non-profit, definitely there's a bit of a waiting line, yeah, waiting list. But it is still, I would say, quite okay. You know, we see people within 2 to 3 weeks after the first call. So that there is actually different support, different service for different needs. Yeah.
Thank you, Leanne. On this note, I was going to pose a follow-up question to all the panelists as well. We've talked a lot about having that support system within the ecosystem, access to resources and all that. I also had a question regarding the stigma, I guess, around using such services based on all your individual experience. Is there a stigma in the workplace if an employee were to use such a service? Perhaps, Anto, would you like to start?
Sure. I think, so I can share anonymously some of the feedback that comes through when we do our onboarding actually with multiple SMEs and MNCs. The stigma that they have is not so much around using the service. The concerns that they have is actually how is their information going to be utilized? So for example, the most common questions that come through in our onboardings, and we use Slido for anonymous interaction, just like what Lynette has done earlier, they will ask us things like, if we use this employee assistance program, is HR going to be using my information against me, and will that affect my performance review? So the employees want to use it, but they're just worried and they're very scared about it affecting their performance. So what we do together with HR is that we address all those questions on the call directly with the employees to build that trust and transparency with them. And we find that by doing so, it actually helps to have higher EAP usage on SafeSpace side. So for example, the benchmark is 3% usage. Ours is at 10%, but primarily because we want to ensure that firstly, you feel safe to share about your mental health concerns. You're able to be vulnerable to your HR as well as to your peers. And the stigma is really more around being seen as weak and not so much using a mental health service actually. So across the board, that's primarily what we've been seeing. And how we can combat that is by giving your employees or your other team and founders an open forum to discuss. So by creating founder groups for open discussion so that we can come together and share our concerns, by having platforms like this that ACE is organizing to have this kind of dialogue with other startup founders. All of this really does help to reduce the stigma. So hopefully we can do more in this space, both from a company level, but also from a community level.
Thanks, Anto. Edward, in your experiences, do you have, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I actually agree with Anto in terms of privacy. I think many are concerned. I think when you speak about your own mental wellness, it's very, very confidential information. So it's about transparency. It's about ensuring that data is protected, privacy is protected. At the leadership level, I have to go back on the topic of prioritization, especially for SMEs, especially in this past year of COVID-19. There's so many challenges. We do need to bump it up the priority ladder because it's just a function of time. If this is not a key priority, for HR, then it will never be something that's going to be done. I think when I speak to many business owners, they do recognize the importance. They do recognize that the staff do need resources, but it's just not within their immediate priority. I think earlier Leanne also talked about the concerns about costs as well. I think there's a perception that it's costly, which may not be true. And so how do we get more of this awareness in terms of affordability out there? That is the main challenge. Yeah.
Thanks, Edward. At this point, Leanne, would you like to add?
Yeah, I actually want to just share that, of course, in the company policy, you don't have to start with saying, just go for counseling and there's EAP. Actually, what is healthy is for the company to have safe space where people come together and they can talk about issues affecting them in a non-threatening way. So if it's a culture where people do share their personal struggles and all, and it's normal to do so, it would then slowly progress to, if there is a need, there's additional support. And such support is actually protected and confidential. It's really for everybody's well-being. And we all went into Zoom the whole of last year, and also currently we're still onto all this online kind of meeting and conference, and sometimes this lack of face-to-face interaction actually, I think, make it even more challenging for us to actually be able to see telltale signs from non-verbal cues of stuff. Yeah, so but we can actually use this kind of platform instead of going straight into the meeting. Sometimes we can check in with each other. So these are some small things that can do to actually promote that culture of support, and that it's all right to, it's okay not to be okay, and that and if leaders themselves, you know, can share about their own mental health struggle, and then invite co-colleagues, and it become a normal thing to talk about your mental well-being, your wellness, and then share tips and how we all can work through it. And it's all right to have Zoom fatigue. Is okay to not be positive all the time. So all these messages can come in if you think sometimes it's helpful to have facilitated sessions, then invite someone from external to come in. Otherwise, you know, it can start within the family, the team itself, which is actually very important. Then straight away say, okay, we have this EAP, and I know a lot of companies, they have EAP, but the take-up rate is very low. Like Antoinette's shares is 3%. Yeah, and so it has to be combined with the whole company's culture. Yeah, that I hope this would be some helpful information to think about. Yeah.
Thanks, Leanne. Certainly trying to work towards an inclusive workplace will not happen overnight. But if we start taking small steps now, slowly but surely we will get there. On this note, in view of time, we would also soon wrap up this panel discussion. But before we conclude, I would like to ask all the panelists if you could give one word of advice to current startup founders, any advice, whether is it regarding handling of stress or the need for more adoption of mental wellness resources in the company, what would it be? Perhaps, Jeff, would you like to start?
I guess for myself, it would be not to be afraid of the societal stereotypes and really focus on the needs of your staff, because for example, like what Edward shared earlier, where it's only at the top, for example, the entire team in the company actually plays their own roles in supporting the whole business ecosystem. So culture is really important. So it shouldn't be a case of just stereotyping people based on on them having mental issues or not, but really placing that importance in them, not only the leaders, but everyone in the company as well, to sort of take a step towards embracing this whole mental health awareness issue and focusing on that. Yeah, sorry, it's a very, very long sentence.
Sorry, I only have one word, self-care. Just remember self-care. Give time, give protected time for your self-care. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, for me, I would definitely share that if you can schedule your work meetings, prioritize your self-care just as much as your work meetings. Put some time and put it in your calendar and make sure that you go for it. And don't forget that you have hobbies to bring you back to who you previously were. You know, I think that's really very important. And once you go through that, that actually really does help you to become more grounded.
I think I'll just build on what the rest of the panelists have shared. Really, at least for the startup founders, there is never ending work. So at some point on each day, do your best, and at some point force yourself to clock out and just zone out, and take some time for yourself, and then start again tomorrow. Because most of the time we don't sleep well at night because we are still thinking about the work that's not done. And you just have to zone out and say, okay, it's enough for this today. I've done my best for today, and we'll restart again tomorrow. And for the rest of the day, I'm going to zone out. I'm going to take care of myself, spend quality time with your family, especially for founders. Your loved ones are important. Please, I think that's something which Jeff mentioned earlier as well. Please prioritize quality time with your loved ones. They provide your support system. And I think even for me personally, they provide the reasons of why we do what we do in our business as well. So that draws the energy, and that continues to, it's not just about self-care, but also finding that meaning of why you do on an each day basis. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, panelists. Once again, thank you, Edward, Leanne, Antoinette, Jeff, for the very insightful discussion. It was very meaningful for me, and I hope that it was as meaningful for the attendees as well. Before we end, we would just like to take a quick group photo with all the panelists. So my team is ready. So on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more, sorry. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you, panelists. So we have now come to the end of the event. If you would like to find out more about our panelists and the organization that they work for, you may also do so by signing the QR code that's displayed on the screen. A very big thank you to all the ecosystem partners for taking the time to join us for this official launch, albeit a virtual one. Hope to see you at a physical launch next time if we can have it. So thank you. Until next time, have a good wind down Friday and a great weekend ahead.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you.
Bye-bye.